There can be no conversation of day one of the Trump presidency without the conversation of pardons, which really Joe Biden put into the fore by pardoning Hunter Biden. Trump and pardons already. They're talking about Joe Biden needs to be engaged in prophylactic pardoning, which, well, is funny until you get to the idea that pardon everybody so Trump can't go after anyone. Why should anybody be held to account is a unique counter argument, one that I put into play. But if you tell me that Anthony Fauci needs to be pardoned, I'm going to ask why. If you tell me that Adam Schiff needs to be pardoned, I'm going to ask why. But in the pardon conversation is the January 6th conversation about all those people who have been placed in jail. And the question is, should they be there? Tony Katz Today. Good to be with you. Nick Searcy joins me right now. International film and television star. You might know him from the TV show Justified, where he was Timothy Oliphant, second place star of that show right there. He is also a filmmaker, a series of films, including the documentary Capital Punishment, which talks about him being at the Capitol on January 6th and what he saw versus what the media told America. His latest book is called Justify This, A Career Without Compromise. You can get that at Amazon.com or wherever fine books are sold. Nick, you and I think, are about 88% together on January 6th. We may have some places where we have a disagreement. And we were talking before the show about you being there, and what you saw is different than what the media portrayed. Now, I don't want to argue that certainly there are people inside the Capitol and certainly there was damage done. But rather, one of the central tenets of your film, Capital Punishment, is that the cameras all worked in one direction and didn't look at the million people in the other direction who were just hanging out. The thesis, is that the thesis of the film?
That's probably the thesis of the first one. You know, the first tagline was everything they told you about January 6th was a lie. They're lying about how many people were involved in all the violence. And they're also lying about who actually did the violence. There were a lot of people in the crowd that day that were not legitimate Trump supporters. They were there to cause a fracas. And the Capitol Police that day, in many cases, were the aggressors, were the instigators. And so many people that have been charged with assault were simply defending themselves from an attack by the Capitol Police, which was unwarranted. We ended up making a sequel to Capital Punishment, which we released this May, called The War on Truth. And in that film, we even go into more detail about exactly who these people are that the government has been calling domestic terrorists. They're not domestic terrorists. They're people who've never been arrested for anything before in their lives. And we go into exactly why the government did this, why they were lying about that day, what the intention was, and who actually caused January 6th to be the event that it was.
Now, to that end, January 6th, as America was told about it, never mind the screaming and yelling we saw from pundits on cable news, came from this January 6th committee. You know TV better than anybody I know. Can you describe to people what a showrunner is and how it is the Democrats put on this story, this show about the January 6th hearings?
Well, the showrunner is responsible for the content of the show. And so the January 6th committee hired an ABC producer to produce their show. They did 9 episodes. It was a 9-episode miniseries. And they basically just left out things that did not fit their narrative. So they lied about the day. They did not call witnesses that could have told them about, for example, in the 9 episodes that they produced, there was no mention of the murder of Ashley Babbitt. And in the War on Truth, we talked to a guy named Taylor Hanson, who was in the room when she was killed and had footage. And he was continually writing the January 6th committee saying, please let me testify. I saw what happened. They didn't want to find out what happened because that didn't fit their narrative. So it's lies of omission. In many cases, they suborned perjury from witnesses. Liz Cheney was caught talking to the lawyer of one of the witnesses who claimed that Trump had tried to grab the wheel of the limo like some sort of Superman to go back and join the insurrection or some garbage. So, yes, it was all a show produced by the January 6th committee.
Talking to Nick Searcy, international film and television star, his latest book. Wait, is this your latest or is this your first?
It's my first. It's my first book.
First and latest. Justify This, A Career Without Compromise by Nick Searcy. You as an actor, Hollywood, we don't always hear from conservatives. It's a conversation we have had a lot over the years. But you have been one of the most front and center people on January 6th. And when it comes to pardons, as President Trump has been discussing pardons, your argument, and you and I differ a little bit here, you believe everybody who is right now imprisoned regarding January 6th should get a pardon. I think there might be a reason one or two people actually got the prison sentences that they got. But before we get into who should get pardoned, I have heard stories repeatedly that the people who have been imprisoned, the people who've been held without bail, without being able to get access to lawyers, possibly without access to doctors, not being able to get phone calls, there's a real horror show going on in our country with American citizens not getting any level of due process. True or false?
Absolutely true. And part of the reason I say we need to pardon them all is because every one of them have had their constitutional rights violated. Okay. Their right to a speedy trial, for example, their right to a jury of their peers. They all had to be tried in Washington, D.C., which, as you know, is a 97% Democrat city. There is no possible way that they could get a fair hearing in front of a jury in Washington, D.C., and that's why you have a 99.7% conviction rate among the January 6th defendants that actually go to trial. So they've already all had their constitutional rights violated. And the problem that I have with this idea that we should pardon only the nonviolent defendants is that they have lied. The government has lied about what they classify as violence. In many cases, for example, there's a friend of mine, Jay Johnston, who was charged with assault because he was standing in the middle of the crowd at the tunnel and they were passing a police shield back over the top of the crowd. He touched the police shield, passed it on, and they characterized that as assault because he touched the police equipment. There's a lady named Victoria White who was beaten on the head 42 times for no reason by a Capitol policeman named Jason Bagsham or something like that. Bagsham, I believe, is his name. And she was charged with assaulting a police officer because she put her hand up to try to stop the baton from hitting her in the head. So when they say nonviolent, I agree with you that there may be one or two or a few people that maybe deserve what they got. But most of the people that they are classifying as violent domestic terrorists are nothing of the sort. And
certainly if we're having a discussion of constitutional rights being violated, well, then that's the ball game. Everybody should be released. As a matter of practicality, is there something that people should expect from Trump on January 20th? Is this something where you feel that a pressure campaign gets involved? Don't forget these people. Don't forget to pardon them all. Don't forget to make this happen. Or is it your feel based on connections, et cetera, that Trump is on this? He's serious about this, and this is coming immediately, if not sooner.
I believe that Trump is on this. He said the other day, on day one, he's going to start issuing pardons. I think that he's on board with all this. I know that he has a transition committee that's looking into all this. There's a lady named Suzanne Monk. You can follow her on X or Twitter. And she has the January 6th Freedom Project. And she has compiled a list of all the defendants, everything they've been charged with. She has all the information there. She's done great work in sort of making sure that if you do want to go case by case, she's got all the information right there ready to go. And I really do believe that he is going to pardon almost everyone on day one. I mean, I think it's coming very quickly, and I think it's necessary because one thing that has to happen is that the whole narrative that the government has created about January 6th has to be totally discredited. And the best way to totally discredit it is to come right out and say everything they said about it was a lie. They have unfairly prosecuted these people, and we're letting them all go.
Talking to Nick Searcy. He is the author of Justify This, A Career Without Compromise. Also, the creator, the filmmaker of Capital Punishment, discussing the January 6th rally and the lies America were told. And the argument is that everything is a lie hits people oddly, because they're like, well, it can't all be a lie. I'm staring at this guy dressed as a Viking in the middle of the House floor. That part can't be a lie. What you're engaged in is really more of an origin story of how this came to be, as opposed to specific one or two acts, the mythology that was created around this.
Yeah, I mean, you say, yeah, there's a guy dressed as a Viking inside the Capitol. How to get in there? You know, they don't show you that. They don't show you that the police said, come on in, and they were leading him around. I mean, that's the thing. They say, you know, they show the people, you know, scuffling with the police. Well, they don't. What they didn't show you was that the crowd was just standing around singing, and the Capitol Police began firing flashbangs into the middle of the crowd, injuring people, causing two men to have heart attacks. And so they were intentionally infuriating the crowd. They were beating women in front of this crowd, knowing that there were, you know, ex-military people there that were basically sheepdogs at heart. And when they saw a woman being beaten for no reason, they did retaliate. So they don't show you why the violence happened. They only show you, oh, look at this horrible thing. Look at this man scuffling with the police. But they don't show you what the police did to the man to infuriate him or to instigate the violence.
So this leads us to what happens to these people who are part of this January 6th committee. Don't get me wrong. I have no respect for them. There's no respect to have for Liz Cheney. There was at a time. She ended that. There's no respect to have for Adam Kinzinger. There may have been at a time. He ended that. There's no reason to have respect for Benny Thompson, who was the chairman of the January 6th committee, and others. There's certainly no respect to have for Nancy Pelosi, who wouldn't allow people like Jim Banks or Jim Jordan onto some of these committees. But Trump has discussed a level of prosecution. I think it was blown out of proportion in the Welker interview with NBC, with Meet the Press. He's going to go after and prosecute these people associated with the January 6th committee. If you were wanting Trump to make the move for the discrediting and setting the record straight, what is the elevator pitch? What do you say to the American people in 30 seconds or less?
They destroyed the evidence that would exonerate many of the defendants. Lies of omission. They did not investigate thoroughly. The first thing I would do is demand that they produce all the evidence that they suppressed, which they would be unable to do. And then I would prosecute them. I would put them on trial for suborning perjury and for withholding evidence, which resulted in the unfair prosecution, the illegal prosecution of innocent people.
So this is not about the committee. This is about how the committee acted. That is a distinction with a difference. His name is Nick Searcy, everybody. Yes, Nick Searcy on Twittix. That's Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it. The book, Justify This. It's not his latest book. It's his first book. Get it right, Tony. Justify This, A Career Without Compromise. Nick, a pleasure. More is coming up. I'm Tony Katz. This is Tony Katz Today.